I'm Professor Ann Forsyth, and I want to begin by acknowledging that the Harvard Graduate School of Design is located on the traditional and ancestral land of the Massachusetts, the original inhabitants of what is now known as Boston and Cambridge. We pay respect to the people of the Massachusetts tribe, past, present, and future, and honour the land itself, which remains sacred to the Massachusetts people. The school also recognises the work of the Harvard University Native American program in cultivating the relationship that led to the creation of this acknowledgement. A quick reminder that we have live captioning available tonight for our virtual audience. To enable captions, click the closed captioning button at the bottom of the live stream window. I also want to invite you to join us for some upcoming GSD public programs. I'd like to highlight this upcoming Friday, November the 3rd, Thomas Fulch, co-director of the Center for Ecology, Landscape and Urbanism of the Design Lab at the Alfonso Ibanez University in Santiago, will give the Carly Fellow Lecture entitled Hydraulic Geographies, Atlas of the Urban Water in the Andean Region. For more information about these and other programs, visit the GSD's website. And now for tonight's event. Today's lecture is supported by the Rachel Dorothy Tanur Memorial Fund. This fund was established in 2006 and funded by alumnus Reuben Mark. It is named for Tanur, who was an urban planner and lawyer who cared deeply about people, their lives, and their living conditions. Prior speakers for the Rachel Dorothy Tanur Memorial Lecture have included Emmanuel Pratt, Andrea Roberts, Sam Obelskin, and most recently, Wanda Dalla Costa in 2022. But tonight, I'm very pleased to welcome Angela Brooks to the GSD as this year's Tanur Lecturer. Angela is a houser and a planner, currently director of the Illinois Office of the Corporation for Supportive Housing, an organization founded in the 1990s with support from the Pew Charitable Trust, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and the Ford Foundation. It aims to provide homes and supportive services to people with multiple challenges. Before this position, Angela served as development manager for the Chicago Housing Authority at a period when the authority was redeveloping housing into mixed-use developments, or mixed-income developments. She's had a varied career in housing and planning, including working in the mayor's office of her native Seattle and being a zoning commissioner in Chicago. Brooks is the first Black female to be elected president of the American Planning Association. She did this after years of involvement with APA, including chairing the Housing and Community Development Division and co-chairing the 2019 APA Housing Policy Guide Working Group. She is currently co-chairing of an important national partnership between APA and the National League of Cities called the Housing Supply Accelerator, which aims to improve how communities meet the housing needs of residents. I've been on the board of the American Planning Association for 5 years, while I've been editor of the association's journal. I can attest to Angela's enthusiasm, dry sense of humour, and her interest in making a difference on the ground. Angela has great energy, as one would expect of a triathlete, and uses that energy and her substantial expertise to promote social justice and racial equity. I welcome Angela Brooks to address the important topic, No Place Like Home.
Wow, after that introduction, I'm trying to figure out who you were talking about, Ann. Thank you so much. Good evening. I'm honored to be here for the Rachel Dorothy Tanur Memorial Lecture. I'm really humbled when you list the names that have previously spoken and have a little bit of imposter syndrome, like how am I in the name of those same folks? But nevertheless, I can only hope the history of tomorrow yields for me a portion of the legacy she created and the work that she did while she was here in the short 43 years that she lived. And hopefully all of us are a little bit motivated as you learn about her and the work that she was able to do. Tonight you're going to hear a lot about my thoughts on housing and a little bit more about supportive housing, and then a few things about what APA is doing on both of those things. There we go. A tenet I hold true personally and professionally is that we aid in creating a safe and just world when every human being possesses a safe, clean, affordable place to not only live, but to thrive. Today I stand before you to talk about a place, the first place which is of a special significance to each of us, a place we call home. When Dorothy said in The Wizard of Oz, which admittedly I'm an Ozzer, I have all the books, I'm excited because The Wiz is coming to Chicago soon. Love all things Wiz, so you have to bear with me to be a little corny for a minute. But there's no place like home. No truer words have ever been spoken. Home is more than a physical structure. It's a place that emotes comfort, safety, and belonging. It is a storied place where memories are born, dreams take flight, and love resides. If you are lucky enough to have that in your life, and we all do not. Yet today, the storied dream of home is more fiction than fairy tale for a lot of people. The lack of affordable housing has grown to be an ever-widening problem affecting millions of people around the globe. Rising property prices, stagnant wages, and limited access to affordable financing options have really resulted in a growing housing affordability crisis. Families are being forced to spend an inordinate amount of their income on housing, leaving little room for other essential needs such as healthcare, education, and savings for the future. The impacts of lack of affordable housing ripples throughout our communities. It affects individuals and families from all walks of life. The elderly, low-income workers, single-parent households, and even middle-class families struggling to make ends meet. When people can't afford suitable housing, it can lead to homelessness, displacement, and a range of social and economic challenges. For many years, I served as a mentor or a big through big brothers and big sisters at work. The thing that was great about the program is that kids came to the office, our littles came to us from school. We didn't do the community programs that many of you are familiar of, so it was very, very easy. But it also disconnected us a little bit from the lives that our littles lived at home. After about 3 years with the same little, she came to me and said, "This will be our last meeting," because her mother was moving for the 4th time in 2 years, but this time it would have been out of the neighborhood for that particular school, so she would no longer be able to go there. The 4th time in 2 years, and she was in the 7th grade. After that, I transitioned to the community program so I could actually be a little bit more engaged with my little. And then that little in 2 years moved 3 times. And I use this story to really talk about, because I had never thought about it as a person who does this professionally, the impact that housing instability has on the lives of individuals, particularly our youth, and the educational impact that that might have, both emotionally and physically. It really changed the lens I have as a professional that works in housing. And beyond its emotional importance, a home plays a vital role in shaping our lives and that of our communities. A home represents a sound environment. It's essential for personal growth and well-being. Yet, many in the U.S. abroad simply do not have the means or the luxury of home. And sadly, that's meant decades of job security for me. Given in part the chasm of income and wealth disparities, the crisis of housing affordability and availability really makes it necessary for those of us who are planners and designers to be leaders in determining what that solution is in our communities. In our pursuit of a better future, we must confront the challenges that prevent people from having a place to call home. This includes addressing economic disparities, working towards affordable housing options, and ending the stigmatization of homelessness. We must advocate for policies and initiatives that prioritize the well-being of each and every individual in our communities. The United States, according to the January 2022 point-in-time count, has almost 600,000 people experiencing homelessness across America. And given there's a great debate on how we count homelessness, you can guess it's probably even higher. Over 40% of renter households in the country spent more than 30% of their income on housing costs from 2017 to 2021, according to the New American Community Survey. This further exacerbates the number of those who are unhoused. U.S. cities have seen a surge of migrants arriving on buses from the border, taxing an already fragile system. In the past decade, the global refugee crisis has more than doubled in scope. In 2022, the United Nations Refugee Agency announced that we have surpassed the 100 million mark for total displacement, meaning that over 1.2% of the global population have been forced to leave their homes. Among these people, over 32.5 million refugees. Many of us in the US distantly follow this, if at all, as it hasn't always impacted us directly. But now in cities across the country, we are visibly seeing the migrant crisis, and the connectivity has become clearer than ever. In Chicago, where I live, it's estimated more than 19,000 migrants, mostly from Venezuela, have arrived since 2022. More than 11,000 are in shelters, with just over 3,000 awaiting placement, many living in police stations, as is visualized here on the top, and O'Hare Airport at the bottom. It pains me to see this, but it is a reminder that we have to do better. We have to be better, and we simply just don't have enough temporarily and permanent housing options for our existing unhoused populations or the current surge caused by policy issues outside of our talk here today. Allow me to talk a little bit more about permanent supportive housing. This is an area often not discussed in the rooms I'm in, but where I currently work, and currently a huge passion of mine. So oblige me for a few moments to talk about that a little bit. Urban planners and designers play a crucial role in shaping the cities and communities that we live in. In recent years, one pressing issue that requires our attention is the need for more permanent supportive housing. By creating and promoting such housing, we can contribute to the overall well-being and stability of individuals and families experiencing homelessness or other forms of housing instability. Permanent supportive housing is a proven solution that combines affordable housing with supportive services. It goes beyond simply providing a roof over someone's head. It addresses the underlying causes of homelessness and helps individuals achieve stability and independence. Supportive services can include mental health counseling, substance abuse treatment, job training, and other forms of assistance that help residents reintegrate in society and live individually. And most importantly, services are voluntary, and we remove barriers for people having a place to call home. Many of you ask, what are the planners' role in supportive housing? By including permanent supportive housing in our plans, planners can make a tangible difference in the lives of these vulnerable populations. These housing initiatives not only address immediate housing needs of individuals, but also provide a nurturing environment that fosters personal growth and stability. Studies have shown that supportive housing programs significantly reduce homelessness rates, improve health and outcomes, and lower costs associated with emergency services. Furthermore, planners have a unique ability to integrate permanent supportive housing into our communities, ensuring they become vibrant and inclusive spaces that benefit everyone. By strategically locating these housing developments near transportation, educational institutions, healthcare facilities, and employment opportunities, we planners and designers can create cohesive communities that support the overall resident well-being of all residents. It's important to recognize that the issue of homelessness affects individuals from diverse backgrounds, and a one-size-fits-all approach simply will not suffice, which is a general rule of thumb of most of the work that us planners and designers do. We must consider the specific needs and demographics of their communities when designing permanent supportive housing. Equitable access to such housing is crucial, so we all must address the racial and economic disparities to ensure that the most vulnerable populations have an equal chance at stable, supportive housing. There's an affordable housing crisis in this country. It's well documented by the slowdown of unit creation following the foreclosure crisis, a process that was already not meeting our needs. Increasing support for individuals eligible for supportive housing also relies on increasing affordable housing. If a person accessing benefits like rental assistance and supportive housing that may not transfer into something like guaranteed housing choice voucher, the incentive to move on is low to non-existent. The lack of expanding comprehensive supports for low-income households is causing all funding support for housing to slow down and become more cumbersome. While affordable housing, supportive housing, and other housing support areas have their own unique funding mechanisms, all sources impact one another, as there are not comprehensive and flexible supports that supplement one another. Some places have instituted systems like flexible housing pools that provide fluid bridge subsidies to allow for individual funding opportunities that do not fit into silos. Yet even these systems run into a long-term funding concern, which individuals will have to move on from bridge subsidies into a space without those supports. In general, places are not incentivized to provide this flexible support and have to creatively address the ongoing need for rental and service support through other means. Goals for planners in expanding permanent supportive housing really do include affirmative, fair housing plans, tying social work, public health, and other public agencies together, pushing for more community accountability, and making budgeting investments easier to talk about. While planners and designers may not be directly involved in some of these specific actions, we are responsible for being aware of the protection and development of housing in our communities. The following are 6 areas that are worth focus and action. First, I'm the APA president, so you should have expected a plug about APA. APA's last policy guide on homelessness dates to 2003, when the organization identified a selection of focus areas for planners as well as policy positions. In 2019, the Housing Policy Guide, which I got to co-chair, update, there was one policy position on homelessness, while the bulk of the document focuses on making places more affordable overall. APA's suggestions include focus on land use through comprehensive plan updates, collaborations with continuums of care, diligent use of public funding, and an emphasis on furthering fair housing, partnering with local service agencies, and the establishment of a national housing trust fund. Number 2, while barriers to housing expansion in this policy guide reads eerily similar to some of the challenges facing the local communities today, the National Housing Trust Fund was established in the Housing and Economic Recovery Act of 2008 and has been investing in affordable housing in our communities ever since. The policy statements in the APA policy guide underline the need for cross-sector collaboration, a sphere where planners are uniquely positioned to affect change in the communities they live and work. Planners can and need to lead through partnerships and looking ahead with their communities to ensure housing comes first. Number 3, land use planning and zoning are perhaps the most relevant topic of interest for planners to consider when reflecting on how a place can foster the development of all tiers of housing. And I stress that, all tiers of housing, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. Zoning law and practice is one of the most contentious and publicly debated topics in public planning practices. As Ann mentioned, I sit on the Chicago Zoning Board of Appeal. A little bit later, we can chat about that. But it's where innovation goes to die, I promise. As planners, we don't solely dictate zoning changes or modifications. Local land use policy shifts, and we must address a number of common challenges. Not in my backyard or NIMBYs. They're a key restrictor. The process behind zoning change can be tenuous and long. The time that land use policy needs to adequately bring about transformation. Sentiments that protect against large-scale changes of any kind. The fourth, we have to play the role of bridge builder. It's important to underline land use and zoning are long-term shifts and help move the needle gradually. Nothing about land use and zoning is quick. Pieces of a larger puzzle that require additional funding support and local policy action. As land use becomes more financially competitive in redeveloped areas, planners also have to identify legal protections for low-income households that might otherwise see themselves displaced from their homes following the investments in the built environment, often that we've been neglecting for decades. here are a couple of questions you can ask yourself to evaluate what you're doing in community. Where is there a concentration of local amenities and who has access to them? What land use regulations are feasible in your place and how can you support changing them? The fifth, understanding federal funding for supportive housing and affordable housing. Supportive housing is primarily subsidized by public finance, not much different than affordable housing. Understanding the available funding sources and how to access them helps planners connect people to the resources that they need to further public missions. At the current moment, the American Rescue Plan is the most prominent source for public funding passed in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic to offer support to local communities. While the timing to using these funds is not permanent, it is existing at this time, and available money can be used to direct pathways to aid in supportive housing unit creation or in creative ways to support individuals in the community move on from challenging situations. CDBG funding, both for larger cities and smaller ones through state administration, may also offer continued opportunities to promote supportive housing unit creation or rehabilitation of positive experiences in neighborhoods. Other resources from the Veterans Administration and FDA also provide opportunities to access funding in a spectrum of offerings, from rural areas that might need more tailored support for a small part of their residents to major cities that need continued funding streams. Federal funding will remain the key funding source for supportive housing supportive and affordable housing unit creation and support, and it's important for all of us to be engaged in the process of supporting legislation to continue that. Number 6 is really about health investments to housing. Local hospitals really can play a leading role in providing supportive housing in a community while also benefiting financially themselves. Hospitals that hold nonprofit status generally invest in properties surrounding their core main campus as a way to show continual investment in their programs and expansion of their core services. Communities may speak out against these investments as they laud them to important assets of strengthening health services in the area. I have multiple examples of how hospitals have used this facet of operation to invest in supportive housing. Using integrated data to illustrate that it costs the public less for a hospital to invest in supportive housing rather than provide emergency services at higher costs. Planners, we can directly tie affordable housing strategies to hospital plans, bringing community anchors to the table in local area plans. Planners, we're concerned with long-term assessment, creating useful pairing to help measure progress. For example, in New Jersey, a public finance agency partnered with local hospitals to develop a program where the agency matched hospital funds to create housing. 5 different hospitals partnered with a developer and nonprofit in Portland, Oregon to create more than 350 units of affordable, supportive, and transitional housing. Denver has connected city funding and a Medicaid carve-out to pair social workers with police officers to respond to incidents that involve mental health. Again, some questions you can ask. Where to start making sense of available funds? How can you place require developers that are building housing with federal funds to include more supportive or affordable housing? How can local plans ensure a focus on supportive and affordable housing? As Ann mentioned, my previous role, I was a developer for the Chicago Housing Authority, and through that, got to know the low-income housing tax credit program very well. And awareness of what is in the Qualified Action Plans, or QAPs, and how to advocate for adoptions of them is an emerging role for planners who are interested in housing. QAPs provide requirements for projects receiving low-income housing tax credits on how many units in a building must be considered affordable, supportive, or other. LIHTC units represent the greatest investments in new affordable and supportive housing, with QAPs playing a vital role in how and where new affordable development takes place in communities across this country. Localities may also step in surrounding access to supportive housing units as a part of the LIHTC requirements. If a QAP plan calls for a certain number of supportive units in a development in order to secure funding, then local officials must ensure that those units are actually filled and expand opportunities within those buildings and the areas around them. QAPs are one of the best mechanisms for ensuring supportive and affordable housing set-asides in integration with the other types of housing. Codifying the immediacy of supportive housing in this way can lead to tangible increases in supportive housing units integrated into mixed income settings with accessible community amenities nearby. Collaborating with and collectively identifying needs through working with public health officials, neighborhood analysis and data, and educational authorities can impact how and where new housing opportunities go in a place, as well as redress systemic segregation or justice-involved housing barriers. The fact does still remain that the biggest obstacle to resolving the housing crisis on all tiers of housing is lack of supply. I was going to say this month, but I guess last month, I was in Washington, D.C. for the release of the 2023 Housing Underproduction Report from Up for Growth. APA sponsored this report as we really do need the data to illustrate the true magnitude of the housing crisis. The findings, unfortunately, were not great news. This year's report found that the housing underproduction is spreading geographically. Small towns and suburban areas are not exempt. And even more disappointing, nationally, underproduction increased nearly 3% since last year's report. 3.9 million missing homes. Back in 2012, that shortfall was just over 1.6 million units. So you can see in a short amount of time, our underproduction has increased substantially. And this is not just a coastal problem. Housing underproduction increased by 4.5% in the suburbs. In small towns, due to the sudden and dramatic drop in unit delivery, housing underproduction increased by 47.8%. The 2023 National Low-Income Housing Coalition Gap Report shows the shortage of affordable rental housing primarily impacts renters with extremely low incomes. Extremely low-income renters in the U.S. face a shortage of 7.3 million affordable and available rental homes, resulting in only 33 affordable and available homes for every 100 extremely low-income rental households. The shortage of affordable rental worsened during the pandemic. During the period of 2019 to 21, the shortage of affordable and available rental homes for extremely low-income renters worsened by more than 500,000 units. Black, Latino, and Indigenous households are disproportionately extremely low-income renters, and of course are disproportionately impacted by this shortage even more. 19% of Black, non-Latino households, 17% of American Indian or Alaskan Native households, and 14% of Latino households are extremely low-income renters, compared to only 6% of white non-Latino households. We have to continue to work with partners and work with each other to help identify planning-led solutions to this crisis. Again, there is no one-size-fits-all solution. And that leads me to talk a little bit more about what Ann mentioned earlier, APA's Housing Supply Accelerator partnership with the National League of Cities. This brings together all the players in the housing world, planners, local leaders, builders, financiers, policymakers, and our state and federal partners. The goal of the initiative is really just to identify solutions to improve local capacity, identify crucial and critical solutions, and speed up reforms. Solving this national crisis really is going to take everyone. I'm honored to co-chair this with NLC President and Tacoma, Washington Mayor Victoria Woodards. Over the past year, we've convened with our steering committee of planners, local leaders, to really dig into the construction, housing finance, and land use reforms. And as I promised earlier, let's talk a little bit more about one of APA's top policy agendas. Zoning reform is really the key to tackling many of the nation's greatest challenges, especially the housing supply crisis. With the right federal support, zoning reform can increase housing choice, lower housing costs, bolster local economies, address inequities in our communities, and connect people to opportunity. Zoning reform continues and will probably be for the foreseeable future one of APA's key priorities. Zoning has created barriers to communities we have all worked so hard to create, or for students that you will be working to create. We know the solutions must be planning-led, we know they must be unique to the community, and we know they must be equitable. I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge that historically the planning profession has used regulations like zoning to restrict access and opportunity to certain populations. As a profession, we have to acknowledge our past, as uncomfortable as it may be, or we simply will not be able to move forward and get our communities to trust that the work we're doing has their best interest with equity as a forefront. One resource to help you is the Zoning and Equity Policy Guide. APA released this guide earlier this year, and it's different from any of the other policy guides that I've read, including one I helped write. It's actually user-friendly and readable. It's written with the goal of empowering the local and regional planner and citizens as well. Zoning code realignment and community development are ongoing and reflective actions that can meaningfully contribute to expanding all housing options in a community. Single-family zoning often emerges as the major scapegoat against construction of more affordable housing in communities. This zoning district in urban and non-urban areas has a history rooted in goals of segregation and has led to inequitable outcomes for non-white populations. However, undoing single-family zoning will not fix barriers to increased development overnight or immediately reverse desperate outcomes that have elevated the social economic status of mostly white populations. What's next? While this type of recognition seeks to increase the number of places where supportive and affordable housing can be built, incorporating zoning changes into neighborhood plans is another mechanism of increasing all options for expanding housing across the city. Local area plans have the opportunity to introduce more innovative and targeted solutions for communities that are interested in expanding housing across their jurisdiction, as well as tie housing development to other policy initiatives in transportation, infrastructure, and social services. In Los Angeles, the city has formally recognized supportive housing as a unique housing topology across the downtown area. Roughly 75% of land is zoned for housing, single-family zone in American cities. That's it, 75% of land for single-family zones, single-family homes only. In some suburbs, zoning laws make it illegal to build apartments in nearly all residential areas. Municipalities have also made minimum lot sizes bigger and added height requirements. This has the effect of encouraging even larger single-family homes and limits housing options like smaller homes. Minneapolis, Arlington, Gainesville, Charlotte, Walla Walla, Washington, and other cities have reformed single-family zones in recent years. Oregon, California, Washington, Montana, and Maine are ending them statewide. This has allowed for a wider diversity of housing in which this slide demonstrates. The image really illustrates the variety of missing middle housing options, and we have to be creative in how we add to the housing supply. ADUs are another way we can expand housing options. APA partnered with AARP to create a guide aimed at overcoming barriers. The political, regulatory, procedural, and financial barriers you might encounter to bring or expanding APA ADU options in your community. Additionally, APA has pulled together the best policy guidance, models, codes, and plans available in a simple one-source location. ADUs are another creative approach to adding more housing. With ADUs, we need to remove the regulatory and financial barriers. What does that mean? I'll give you an example. In my home state of Washington, Walla Walla, which has a population of about 33,000 people. In 2018, Walla Walla officially approved zoning reform that streamlines accessory dwelling unit regulations, promotes multifamily housing, and effectively upzones the entire community. The maximum ADU size in Walla Walla is now 800 square feet without limits relating to the principal dwelling unit. This was highlighted in Planning Magazine last summer if you really are interested to dig deep in that. Another opportunity is through adaptive reuse. Besides building from new, there are opportunities for housing through adaptive reuse, converting underused buildings such as, I don't know, office buildings that we all have at this point, or even churches into housing. This approach emphasizes preservation or rehabilitation of existing buildings. To utilize this approach, communities need to look at their zoning and their building regulations that can be barriers to adaptive reuse. Not only do we need a diversity of housing, but we need to think about the climate impacts with housing. In Western Colorado, Habitat for Humanity skipped natural gas and instead powered 100% of its 27-unit affordable housing development with solar panels. Not only is this meeting housing needs, but it's also considering the environment as well. Not only do we need a diversity of housing, but we also need to think about the climate impacts as well. In Western Colorado, Habitat for Humanity skipped, this is in Boise, Idaho. Yes. And in Boise, this is the LEAP community, and this is using shipping containers that were converted into homes as a pilot. They include solar to help reduce the cost of ownership and long-term operational cost. Beyond adaptive reuse, we have to be creative in our housing solutions that we're offering to communities. I'm sure many of you have read or have heard of Doug Shoupp's book of UCLA, The High Cost of Free Parking. It estimates the U.S. has set aside 2 billion parking spaces for just 250 million cars and light trucks. This results in far more land dedicated to cars than housing. We have to prioritize housing people over cars. Eliminating parking minimums is not just for large metro areas. Sandpoint, Idaho, that has a population of nearly 8,700, has made significant strides in prioritizing housing people. The catalyst was the construction of a new bank in the historic downtown that would have required 200 new parking spots, despite only being 1 block from a municipal lot. The bank construction with an historic building interior remodel was the catalyst for the zoning requirement. To get the community talking about parking minimums, this permit got it started. So what did they do? They eliminated parking minimums downtown entirely. They significantly reduced minimums for commercial and residential properties elsewhere in the city, and they instituted parking maximums. This type of zoning reform can decrease high housing costs by promoting development, and other communities have used it as a powerful economic development tool. We also have to take a look at our building codes and our bulk regulations, similar to the city of Memphis, which has really been taking a look at the minimum lot size, maximum height, and maximum floor area ratio as other impediments to expanding not only housing options, but availability. And it wouldn't be me if I didn't have some type of call to action. It is clear our communities are facing a challenge that needs urgent attention, which is the crisis of housing. This issue threatens the heart of our diverse, vibrant communities. And it's not just an economic problem, it's a humanitarian one. With cities becoming increasingly inaccessible to a broad population of a broad diversity of our population, I call on you to use your expertise, your innovation, your insight and vision to create and revolutionize housing solutions for all. Incorporate housing in master plans. We urge you to integrate affordable housing units into new developments, retrofit older buildings where possible, to house low-income families. This can cultivate a more inclusive community and reduce social economic disparities. We have to leverage innovation, design, and technology. We have to start thinking outside of the box of our traditional models. Use innovative architecture designs, like modular or micro-housing, to create more homes within the same footprint. We have to exploit green building technologies to lower utility bills and make homes more affordable over time. We've got to prioritize transit-oriented development. By focusing on developments near transit hubs, we can create affordable, densely built communities with easy access to public transportation, reducing the financial burden of commuting for those living paycheck to paycheck, and reduce our impact on our environment. Engage in partnerships. We have to collaborate with private builders, nonprofits, and government bodies to pool resources, share knowledge, and jointly create affordable housing solutions suited to our unique city or town needs. Listen to our communities. We have to include local residents in our planning processes. Their insights can provide invaluable direction for creating affordable housing that actually meets the needs and aspirations of the community. And we have to be more creative in how we engage our communities. Remember, our cities are not just about skyscrapers and commercial districts. They're about our people. Our collective efforts can change the face of housing, making our cities more accessible, inclusive, and livable for everyone. It's time to step up and meet the much-needed paradigm shift. Together, we can ensure that everyone has a right to the city or the town, regardless of their race or their income. Let's build cities of diversity, inclusivity, and equality. Let's build cities for all. In closing, let us cherish the notion of home, for it's a precious gift that lies at the core of our humanity. By working together, we can build a world where everyone has an opportunity to experience the joy, the warmth, and the love that comes with having a place they can truly call home. Keep in touch. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Angela. And I want to have the first question. Actually, I have lots of questions, but I'm going to get started. It's interesting to be having a housing session where I'm talking to someone who does supportive housing, because it's much more multidimensional than just trying to make housing affordable. And one of the things you talked about was the importance of cross-sectoral collaborations across public, private, and non-profit sector, but also amongst different kinds of domains of interest like housing and transportation and so on. And that's long been an ideal in the healthy cities area, which is my area of expertise. But it's hard to do. There are some lessons like the importance of champions or some kind of institutional base. But I wonder, given your interest in supportive housing, if you could reflect on sort of lessons or good examples of how to do that kind of work in this sort of supportive housing domain.
Yeah, you're right. It is certainly. I ignorantly left affordable housing development and came to supportive housing and thought it was similar, and it's much, much, much harder, to your point. A lot of the work that we do is, right now, we're doing a supportive housing institute for developers interested in individuals with intellectual disabilities. That's a very specialized niche. And so one of the things we're finding is we do find nonprofits that are on the service side and find developers to help them, because it's going to be really hard to find a developer that wakes up and is like, I'm going to work with somebody with AD. That's just not a niche. And so we're working with service providers to help find the mission-driven developers, and we're helping to develop them. The flexible housing pool that California really started, even more so, but we're doing in the Cook County area, we work with hospitals, and they are putting money into the pool and providing a bridge subsidy. So that's another way of really engaging. But there's not a really easy answer for that, which is why CSH exists, honestly. And a lot of that is just really doing a lot of advocacy and education to encourage people to consider it.
So your group is sort of the champions of this kind of housing?
Yeah, there's quite a few, but our niche really has been, or at least I can speak to my office specifically, we do a lot of work with developers in really training them on what supportive housing is and working with service providers. And I guess you could say we do marriages between developers and service providers.
Yeah, it'd be something that would be good to have in the health domain.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see there's hospitals across the country that are starting to do housing, mostly because there is a direct correlation between the frequent flyers in emergency rooms and people who need housing. And so there's a direct correlation between having them look at how do they increase housing options, because they do really save money on the back end. So there is a financial story to get hospitals involved. And so as we're working on our neighborhood plans, or if you have medical districts, as you're working with them to create their medical districts, setting aside an area for housing to help them even think that in their master plans is a huge step.
So just sort of reflecting a little bit more on the issue of supportive housing brings us to that issue of home. And as you framed it in the initial part of your talk, and as you know, as we think about it in general, home is an emotional kind of, sort of has emotional resonance. It's about a sense of well-being, a sense of belonging. But as policymakers and planners and designers, we're often working with an environment or financial dimensions of housing and not directly dealing with those emotional, spiritual kind of dimensions of home. How do you resolve that sort of tension in your own work and maybe in supportive housing?
Yeah, I think for me, and some of you have heard the story before if you were at MPC, like how I ended up in this work specifically is when I was in graduate school, I did not get any money, so I had to work and go to school, and I worked as a probation officer, and I had to detain a client who'd brought their daughter, and I had to take her home, literally. And it was a public housing development that I thought was vacant until that moment. And that was when it clicked for me. And so to answer your question, I don't separate it, which is why I do what I do, because I wasn't able to. But I think one of the things as a zoning board person, because that's very black and white, there's no gray area in that. One of the things that I try to do in that space is look at what is in the code, and we're only seeing, those things that are being appealed. And, you get a lot of emotion, always get emotion in public meetings. People who are for or against a project that I do believe should probably exist, but you do have to listen to the communities and make a decision based off of what's in the code, which is why a lot of the speaking I do as APA president is talking about when you're doing your planning, your master plans, your comprehensive plans, whatever it is you do in your community, thinking about what makes sense and where and codifying it to remove some of that personal stuff that comes up later. Because we can all, I would like to think, most of us can think about where it makes sense. And there's always going to be a tension in a community, particularly when you're doing supportive housing. I think in 20 plus years of doing housing work, I've only had 2 developments I've worked on or have seen as a commissioner that have had community support. It's almost non-existent. And so, one of them I will never forget, the reason they were there, it was for a transitional housing facility, and there was a parking requirement. No one coming to the transitional, no unhoused person was going to come there in a car. The only parking they needed was for the 3 or 4 staff members, but they needed a 1-for-1. And it's ridiculous. So that is how the NIMBYs were able to come through, and that was the one issue that was going to get something that otherwise would have been fit in rejected. And so you've got to start looking about the things you want that make sense and think about all of the barriers our policies and our zoning require to get them done that are exactly opposite of what we're trying to get done.
Well, actually, that leads me to my third question. Sorry, I'm taking up everyone's time, questions. But zoning reform is really controversial, and partly because it does connect these sort of emotional dimensions of what is home with the physical changes to the neighbourhood. But it can be kind of complicated. APA is promoting zoning reform, but some people who promote zoning reform are trying to, who are not pro-planning. How do you, as a houser and zoning commissioner, where do you see the sort of key important locations for zoning reform, and where do you think that some of the reforms are perhaps going too far or undermining planning?
Yeah. Why didn't you guys start asking questions before Ann got to that one? So I think one of the things, and I've probably said it 3,000 times a second ago, and I always say it, is, zoning reform is not one size fits all, so you really do have to individually look at your community. I think there are going to be some communities that, like if I come in a room, I am a former real estate developer that never did anything under 200 units. So out the gate, you're going to think I'm talking about a big apartment complex, but I could be talking about a duplex. So I think it's really important for professionals when you're talking about what you're saying in zoning reform that you show it, because you're not always talking about increased density of some crazy amount. You could be just saying, let duplexes, and as driving around Cambridge today, there's a whole bunch of duplexes here that look like single-family houses. So you have to show people what you're talking about. That can eliminate, I mean, I'm from Seattle originally. Seattle's not the same city I grew up in by any stretch of the imagination. The density is, I don't know, I've never looked, but it looks like it's quadruple. But, you know, it's not comfortable. I mean, it isn't. And so just kind of visualizing what that could look like and what that should look like. And the scale, I think often we're planners, we're architects, you use nerdy terms. That automatically gets people defensive when you hear the word density. People automatically go to the worst case scenario. Minneapolis, we'll see how that dukes out in court. I mean, that's being pulled in under an environmental clause. And, you know, I think we write our comprehensive plans. Nothing's ever going to happen to what we write in the comprehensive plan. It's a vision, it's a goal. It doesn't mean that's going to happen. And so, again, it's just about communication, expecting the battles and not being scared of them. And I think sometimes when I sit in zoning board hearings, people often are like, well, that's what the community wants. Sometimes we have to acknowledge our communities are NIMBYs and that they don't want something because it's really creating the same issues we're talking about in equity. And that's not cool either. So I don't have a good answer for that, but that's my circle around it.
Is that a question?
Hi, Angela. Thanks so much for being here. On the topic of NIMBYs, can you give any examples or strategies for shifting mindset with that particular, you know, what's the word, like block in the process?
You know, there's no easy answer to that. You know, so I'm a storyteller, if you guys didn't figure that out. So when I first came out of planning school, my first job was doing permits for cell towers, and this was in the late 90s, early 2000s. So everybody did not have a cell phone. But I can assure you, nobody wanted a cell tower. Just didn't. I never went to a hearing where anybody wanted me there. And, you know, part of the thing I had to learn, which I didn't learn in school by any stretch, but who thought I'd be doing cell towers? But nevertheless, was how to really work on, you know, I'm a very frank person, so I'd come to meetings like, look, you don't want this, I get it. You guys might deny this permit, but I'm going to sue and I'm going to get it. Like the Telecommunications Act tells me I'm going to get this. So accepting that this is going to happen, what could make this more palatable for you? Like, I mean, you could want it to be an ugly pine tree. I mean, that's what people used to choose back then, and it's not going to look right. But if that's what you want, then we can make this a little, but this is going to happen. And so I think part of it is just in your community engagement. You know, I think sometimes people come into rooms and pretend that, you know, like some things are just going to happen. So how do we make that work? And, you know, there's going to be some people who are never going to move the needle, but the vast majority of times, particularly when we're talking about housing, visualization makes a huge difference. People have in their mind something that may not be what you're proposing. So show them what you're talking about. And data, I mean, data makes a difference. I mean, people like seeing numbers of impact and seeing what it's going to look like, or even sometimes particularly a lot of the affordable housing people are talking about development aren't what I'm working on. It's where their teachers, where their firefighters, where, you know, where working class people in their communities are going to live. So talk about that. Talk about who that's going to be. And that automatically, you feel really bad when you're fighting housing for a teacher. Like you just do, particularly if you have kids or if you remember when you went to school. So like changing the narrative on what the story is, because we can almost always predict what the argument is going to be.
Do you have an example of managing to change the narrative in supportive housing?
I just, this is not something I was working on. It was a transitional home that was going on the north side of Chicago. I can't even think of the alderman now, but so Chicago has what we call aldermanic prerogative, which basically means we have 50 aldermen, which also means we have 50 mayors. And so the first question people ask is, where does the alderman sit? Like that actually makes a difference regardless of the code.
Right.
Anyway, I'm not going to talk about that. I might lose my zoning commissioner job. But nevertheless, we had an alderman who came in support of a transitional shelter. And not only did she come with support herself, she had, I don't know, I think it was a petition of like 300 letters of support, and she organized residents to come speak in support. Like, there were literally maybe 3 people against it, but 30 people signed up for it. I actually don't know how they did it. I actually feel like a failure in all the work I've done because I've never had that level of support. But it was really important to see the political leadership there. And I think what did it for a lot of that community is there was an encampment in a park not that far away, and they realized they're going to be here one way or the other. It's better if we have them inside than in our park. So.
Thank you for the lecture. It was really interesting. In terms of like housing in like the suburbs or rural and like, you know, cities, I know you mentioned that. Can you elaborate on that? And in terms of like transportation, you know, because like in cities there's more public transportation, and how to navigate that in terms of people who are unhoused?
Yeah, I think, you know, I'm from a city, but my parents aren't, so I spent a substantial amount of time in the rural South where there's barely a bus. And so, you know, even in our more rural communities, and a lot of the work, I work for a statewide organization, so a lot of the work we do is not in Chicago, and transportation is the #1 impediment. And so we've got to think about models. It obviously won't be a train, but what's the bus service looking like, which is kind of why we have to start looking at the policy of funding, because we know a lot of the transportation money goes to the larger cities, but we have to look for particularly the rural areas and some of the suburban ones. How do we increase transportation access and what it looks like? It doesn't have to be a big train system, doesn't have to be a big bus, and working with community partners. So if one of the permanent supportive housing developments we're working on, I don't even know what city, but it's far away from Chicago. It was like a 5-hour drive. There's no bus system, so they worked with a neighborhood transportation system that the service provider funds to help their residents get to and from the grocery store, to and from medical facilities. So they had to get creative, but it's not a cheap way to do it, and certainly not a long-term solution, but that's how they're addressing it in that rural area. And so in Illinois right now, we have the state plan to end homelessness, and transportation is a huge focus of that, to really look at how do we impact rural homelessness, because transportation is going to be probably the biggest factor for them, even if you get something built, because there's just going to be the distance that's a little bit different. So we're working toward that, so stay tuned. But I do think it's an important part, and a lot of times when I talk, because I am such a city person, people aren't going to resonate with what I say, because, you know, I live in Chicago, I'm from Seattle, but, you know, I recognize I went to school in Jackson, Mississippi, the bus stopped at 6, so I'm very, very familiar with not having access to transportation options and coming up with solutions, and there's not a lot of easy answers for it, so.
Thanks so much for being here. It's really an honor. My family immigrated to Logan Square in Chicago in the 70s, so nice to hear someone with a Chicago perspective too.
You know a lot about gentrification and displacement then.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there, obviously. The hospital example you shared was so interesting to me, how hospitals are allocating more budget to housing, and I'm wondering if you can talk about more innovative models where we're seeing silos broken down more at the government level, if you have seen that. And where you think the future of that model is going.
I think we're just starting to see a lot of it. We're going to start seeing a lot more, probably from you all's home state of California. You'll start, I mean, despite all the issues currently going on with Kaiser, they've been a huge investor in housing for sure. Our Los Angeles office does a lot of studies, so I'm not as familiar, that's not my side of the house, but there's quite a considerable amount in Chicago. We've got 8 hospitals that contribute to our flexible housing fund, which is a bridge subsidy. So we're starting to do that. I can definitely link you with, if that's an interest area. My assistant director is really heavily involved with that. And that flexible housing pool is supported by both the city of Chicago and Cook County. So it's a county-wide pool. And they fund that, and the AIDS Foundation of Chicago houses the fund, and they administer. And it's really, it's a model taken from California, but it's administered very specifically in the Chicago area. So next time you're home, we can make sure you have some meetings with some of those folks too.
And so the idea is the hospitals collaborate and
they contribute to the fund, and then they fund units.
Thank you so much for the talk. I spent my undergrad in downtown Chicago, and it's been like a contradictory situation for me, because I see like we are turning a lot of, skyscrapers into housing, like the one on Wabash Avenue or the
Tripine Tower, we're proposing that if we have this high-end building, it will kind of relieve the shortage in Chicago, the home market. But I do have this concern about, like, are we really trying to, are we kind of make contribution to even exaggerate the gap between different types of housing, especially as architect, it's like luxury apartments and high-end residential building is like a very big part of architect's job. So I'm trying to like figure out as architecture students or as design student, when we are doing this type of, high-end building, are we like, what's our position in this kind of housing market, or just like kind of my thinking here?
That's a hard one for an architect because you kind of got to do what you get contracted for, right? But on the policy side, particularly around those buildings, that's where you start seeing affordable rental ordinance in Chicago or whatever it's called in other cities that have a requirement for affordable units in that. I have mixed feelings on that specific situation, but in general, I do think it's important that as we look at center city development, that we start really pushing for affordable units to be a part of those, because there are amenities. It's near a worker hub, it's near transit, it's near all the things that make it sexy for everybody to live. So, I would love to live there. I can't either. So we have to make it affordable, not even just for low income, even for middle class and working students. I can't imagine as a student how hard it might have been to live in that area, and you went to school right there. So we have to, really look at our policies that support and subsidize affordable units going into those buildings, or incentivize by either density bonus or any of the things that can help developers. And having been a developer, I can say it's hard to pencil. And so I think sometimes there's not an alignment with our policy decisions and the fiduciary responsibility. So those of you who have any interest in doing any type of planning, if you haven't taken a class on finance to understand a real estate performance, it's an imperative thing to understand. So when you're writing policy, you're not precluding the thing you want by something you want. Sometimes some of the architecture design standards can be a little bit, we had an affordable deal where the city wanted some specific things added to they had to go to all the units. But it, took our affordable unit costs up to about $500,000 per unit, which that's not sustainable either. So we have to think of a way to marry what we want from a design standard, but also the financial ability to get a unit built. And last night I stayed in a hotel out by O'Hare because I didn't want to get up early. And it used to be an office building, and it was the strangest thing. I stayed there intentionally because I just wanted to see how an office building becomes a hotel. And yeah, it was interesting for sure. I totally knew it was an office building the whole time, so.
There's one up the back.
Thank you. I'm glad you brought up the intersection of planning policy and real estate pro formas, because that's kind of what my question is about. So I'm taking a field study this semester, and our site of focus is Baltimore, Pennsylvania Station, which, if you're familiar with Baltimore at all, it's the main transit hub of Baltimore, and Amtrak is redeveloping the station area right now, and the focus of the field study is our kind of design vision. We have urban designers, we have architects, and then I'm a planner on the team. We met with the director of the Baltimore City Planning Department, Director Ryder, and he said that to us, the existing developer, their plan, you're talking about parking reform. He says, it's just their plan is overparked. That Amtrak, the railroad even, is proposing all this parking. And he's the planning director of the city, and he has his policy goals. They want mode shift. That's, the goal of the city of Baltimore. And then we talk to the development team as well, and they say, well, yeah, but Baltimore's kind of a driving town. Our transit system has taken a lot of hits over the year. Finally, today, actually, the Red Line got revamped. I don't know if any of you saw that. That was exciting. But what they said is our lenders expect a certain amount of parking to be built. And at the end of the day, no money, no project. So how do we, we have these policy goals, but the people, if you go all the way up, we have to convince bankers about this. And I'm curious how you have, in your professional experience and as the head of the association, how you have dealt with that question.
Yeah, that specific issue hasn't come up just yet, but I'm going to make sure it comes up. That's part of the reason for the Housing Supply Accelerator. We have financiers in the room because there is a policy. It definitely is a policy on alignment on some of those issues. And I do think, as someone who lives on the south side of Chicago, and I most certainly am a driver, we do have to think about yes, there should be less cars. Yes, there should be multi-modes of transportation. But there are some instances where part of the reason people have cars is a safety issue. And there's a reason for that. So, you've got to think about that. Parking is super expensive. So if a developer wants to overpark, that's just interesting to me because the cost of a parking spot is pretty pricey. So I'd love to see their performa. But nevertheless, I think that's where the planning department has to really work with lenders and do some education around that as well. But a real estate market study usually resolves that because you can show how many parking spots are needed. Generally speaking, developer is not going to build anything they can't lease, rent, or sell. You know what I mean? So that's an interesting scenario for sure. But definitely there are some requirements that lenders have, particularly around affordable deals, that do make it more difficult to build. And that's some of the work that we're ultimately going to have to do, those of us who are in the space, to advocate for. Because that particular situation, yeah, well, I have to follow up with you on that one.
Thank you. You keep saying these different roles you've had over the years.
Jack of all trades.
Yeah, but I think it's great, right? I mean, because it's clear how it all has come together, right? To kind of be able for you to do what you do. So I have two questions related to that. Yeah. How much of that was intentional, or were these things that just came to you and you jumped on opportunity? And I think this is particularly useful for our students to hear, right, as they think about their next moves. And then also looking back, was there one particular role or opportunity that you think has been just really important and central for you to do what you do now? And it would be kind of cool if it was maybe one that was unexpected, right? That kind of slid in there. But
yeah, no, I think, thank you for the question, because I actually do like talking about my story for that reason, because most of it was not intentional to your question. It's been going with the flow. Like when I first went to graduate school and I had to work, I certainly didn't expect to be a probation parole officer. And then I also worked at Covenant House, which is a youth shelter for, at that time, I assume the same 16 to 21. So that definitely kind of shifted some of my life focus. But I think the job that I least expected that was most helpful was doing the permitting for cell towers, because being in a room where nobody wants anything, the staff didn't want me, the community didn't want me. I had to go to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. If any of you know the history, and it's a beautiful town, if anybody from Coeur d'Alene is here, but not a good town of history of race relations. So I had to go to Coeur d'Alene to ask for a cell tower permit. And I'm 24 at the time. I was like, I'm going to get ran out of this town. So, but it helped me learn how to speak a lot better. I've always been a talker, but learning how to present an idea, learning how to work a room, that probably was the job that developed me more than I would have ever expected. And I certainly never expected to have that job. But I also, on the back end of that stint of my career, started doing the leasing for them. So it started making me learn the numbers. So I always tell students, learn the numbers. I didn't. It's really hard and painful later to learn. But that job prepared me the most. I think intentionality for me, when I really got interested in, when I worked at the Mayor's Office of Housing in Seattle, I managed a developer incentive program, the multifamily tax exemption program in Washington. And so I did a lot of work with developers and disposition. And it was like, ooh, I want to be a developer. So I started working toward that. Wasn't a good fit for me, which is why I switched back to where I am. But it helped, in your professional lives, you might have several iterations of your career, and it is perfectly okay. And it's sometimes okay to go with the flow, because when I was sitting in your seat as a graduate student, I was like, I'm going to be the planning director of a large city by the time I'm 40. And for all intents and purposes, I've had maybe one job as an actual planner of a really small rural town outside of Seattle. So, my career just took a different gauge, and I would say I've enjoyed it. So it's, you might have a preset imagination of what you might do, but go with the flow. And if something else interests you, the great thing about architecture, design, planning, it's so interdisciplinary. It gives us we have the fluid nature of being able to do several different things. And I say go with the flow.
I don't know. I think that's a great way to end, to go with the flow. So I'm going to type that out and put it on my wall. So thank you so much, Angela. It's been a fantastic conversation. And just thinking about this important dimension of our lives, this emotional feeling of home, but the policy and planning activities that are needed to create that environment. It's just a key area in planning, one of our foundations, and thank you for sort of sharing your ideas about it tonight.
Thank you for having me. My running joke is my dad is so excited I'm here because I would have never had the grades to be at Harvard. So thank you for having me. My dad can check this off his list, and I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Scott Turner, who also serves on the APA board with us, who lives in this area, for joining us. Thank you, Scott.